Because I just get a comment back on the helicopter I built today.
Almost good. Let a few more folks try.
And yours.
Good evening and welcome to the October meeting of the Granville Exempted Village School Board. Thank you all for being here. Would you please rise and join us in the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's take the roll and then
Mr. Denies.
here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Corman.
Here.
Ms. Deeds.
Here.
Mr. Wolf.
Here. Before we move to commendations, I know that Mr. Brown would like to make a couple of observations around significant loss to our community and our schools.
So many of you are aware that we lost a staff member this weekend, Sarah Danford, who has been teaching in Granville schools for 46 years. Lost a battle with a long illness this weekend. There are teachers in our organization that were in her classroom. Sarah was the epitome of excellence in education. And it's a tremendous loss for our students, staff, and the entire community. 46 years. That's 1972, I was born then. Sarah, I remember talking to her on multiple occasions, and she just kept reiterating her love and desire to teach. And it was unparalleled. And so I'd ask you to join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. So, accommodations is part of our meeting where we recognize students, staff for their outstanding achievement. And quite honestly, Sarah, the only way that she would allow us to recognize her is in that format because she always hated the attention. And she would tell you if you violated that. So this year, 8 Granville High School students have been recognized by the National Merit Program. We have 5 Granville High School students who were recognized as National Merit Commended Scholars for their outstanding academic promise after taking the preliminary SAT National Merit Scholar qualifying test known as the PSAT. I'd like to congratulate Georgia Bain, Jordan Chodek, Max Lerner, Katie Hauser, and Logan Smith as commended scholars. Come on up. Georgia's had a busy week. You know, she was crowned as homecoming queen. So it's been a good senior year, right, so far? All right, well, let's get a picture here for all the parents.
Parents, if you want to step forward for a picture.
Yeah, you can come on up. Yes.
Great.
Max, that is the nicest jacket he's ever worn. What size is that? Is it a 42 regular? Or?
It's a little bit small.
Okay. I'd ask to borrow that. All right. We also have 3 Granville High School students that have been recognized by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation for their high scores on the preliminary SAT National Merit Scholarship qualifying test. They qualified as National Merit semifinalists and will apply to earn finalist status. Congratulations to Kieran Lele, Kristen Zainal, and Bjorn Ludwig. Come on. Okay. Our 3 semifinalists are among the highest scoring entrants in Ohio. Those that reach finalist level will be notified next February, and the National Merit Scholarship winners will be announced beginning in April 2019. Congratulations and good luck. And congratulations to all of our students. That is quite an accomplishment. The level of achievement that you have to reach for that type of status is pretty amazing. It's a very small percentage of students in the state of Ohio, so congratulations. We're very proud of your academic performance. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to ask Kristen Zainal if she'd like to come forward and deliver the student report.
Hello everyone, I'm Kristen Zainal. I'm the student body president, here to give the monthly report on the happenings of Granville High School. So as you know, we're coming to a close of the homecoming season. There was a lot of buzz and excitement, but now it's all over. We had the parade and fun stuff last week. Of course, the seniors put literally 0 effort into the float and came in last place, and the sophomores came out with a victory. And then we had the dance, which was super fun, and so that's just been a great season for Granville. Regarding the Granville Global Scholars Program, the Level 2 students take their field trip to the Honda plant in Marysville tomorrow. And so the Global Scholars Program is still just thriving with over 85 participants this year in all 3 levels. And they're learning about different cultures, taking on global issues, and designing projects that tackle issues that they care about. And as a Level 3 Global Scholars graduate, I can say it's a great program for challenging students in growing and learning. 1 week from today, the National Honor Society has their induction ceremony, which is just another opportunity for Granville to show off its high-achieving students, and as well as their commitment to service and leadership roles in the community. Right now, the talk of the senior class, besides college applications and stress, of course, is the beginning of the Global Awareness Project that kicks off next week, which is a senior capstone type project about foreign countries, and people get in groups and just take on an issue that's affecting that country. And so huge shout out to Denison for providing contacts for all 36 nations that the senior class is taking on. Getting to know people from that nation one-on-one is a great opportunity for learning, as well as OSU is offering to host the senior class at their library that has region-specific and country-specific areas of their library for more in-depth research. So that's what's going on. Thank you for sharing. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Yes, so we are going to jump into our staff reports now. So this is usually the time that you can get up and run out and not hurt anyone's feelings.
While he's setting up,
Fantastic job.
one more announcement. The boys soccer team is hosting a charity game tomorrow night. It's for Bone Marrow Match organization, and all the proceeds from Kate and concessions goes to the organization, but the highlight is you can pay $2 to penalty kick on Mr. Durst. So if anybody would like to pay $2,
It's
to
got a
take
pretty,
the penalty
pretty
shot.
big what?
I know, but,
Wingspan,
so
I mean.
it could be difficult,
Yeah.
but, that would be the highlight of the.
What if you accidentally hit him when you kick it? Just saying.
There was one also, another omission from Kristen's report, that the freshman class took second place, and that float was in my garage for a week and a half. And so I was pleased to get it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, our first staff report tonight is on federal funding. Gwen and I are going to talk about some of the different funding sources we get from the federal government. Really, this is required of both of us at different times in the year. We decided to combine them into one and just give you a brief update on what our plans are with those funds and what we can spend them on. So the first thing we'll talk about is Title I Part A. So the money that we get for this is based completely on what the federal government calls disadvantaged youth. The funding for this is made on an income-based metric based on the number of free and reduced lunch population that you have. So this is something, we got about $130,000 this year, for this school year from the federal government. That actually is a little bit more than we received in previous years. And what that tells you is our free and reduced lunch population increased a little bit. It was kind of a surprise when we got that, but our numbers have gone up since the early 2000s when this benchmark was first set. One of the guidelines that you'll hear as part of this is supplement, not supplant. So what this means is with these federal funds, you can't say, oh, we're going to pay for this program or this opportunity for students now with this money. You can't supplant, or you can't supplant something you already have in place. You can only supplement what you currently have. So what we've chosen to use these funds for is what's called targeted assistance. We're looking at at-risk populations. These include historically at-risk populations. So it's not just for Granville, it's really from a nationwide and state perspective. They include minority populations, homeless populations, foster care, academically at risk, and low-income family income students. We specifically target students that fall into those categories, and some students may fall into several of those categories for assistance with these particular funds. What we've chosen to spend those on, we've had 2 district employees that provide early literacy intervention in grades K through 3. That has been present as long as I can remember, so that goes back to 2000, where we've had some of these funds paying for early literacy intervention at the elementary school. And then with the small increase that we got this year, we expanded our summer reading intervention program with the new demands of the 3rd grade guarantee and what students are expected to perform going into 3rd grade. We're now providing more summer intervention to prevent that summer loss of gain that you get during the school year in these at-risk populations or at-risk students. So we're able to expand that program for our rising 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and then even some 4th and 5th graders as well this year. At no cost to the parents, and our teachers provide all that intervention. So that is something, that's a supplement, not a supplant, because that was not in place at the level that we've had before. Title II funds.
Brian, real quick.
Yeah.
How many students do we have in the district that are on free and reduced lunch?
Thomas, I don't know if I can give you the exact number, but percentage-wise, it's about 5 or 6% depending on the building. So somewhere, what is that neighborhood of 150 students, give or take? Yeah. Okay. Title II funds are allocated to spend only on improving teacher quality. So these are professional development funds. Our allocation for that this year was about $40,000. That allocation is for our entire school district and any students or schools located within that district. So 10% of our population within the Granville School District actually includes students that go to Granville Christian Academy. They're included even though they're not all from Granville. The vast majority are not from Granville. They're included in that population. So we actually have to funnel and be the recording agent for 10% of those funds that go to GCA. And that's true of any public school in the state of Ohio. If you have private schools within your boundary, you're responsible for administering the Title II Part A funds, and they get a percentage of what you get based on their own population. So that's why Granville Christian Academy gets about 10%. You can use them for a variety of things. You can use to improve teacher quality, retention, address class sizes, increase highly qualified teachers.
the thing we use them for is professional development. So this past year and in future years, we spent a large chunk of our Title IIA funds on the Summer Institute that you approved, if you remember last spring, for the K-6 literacy program. That was a significant chunk of that money. But the remaining that we had left is to support coaching for project-based learning and professional development coming up here in October for our staff. We also use a little bit of those funds to cover in-house staff collaboration and PD, so the sub-funds don't come out of the district general fund, they come out of this Title II fund. But you're kind of limited in what those subs costs have to be related to PD and collaboration for the staff. And then the last one is Title IV. This is a brand new grant that just started last year. This year our allocation is $13,000. Last year it was $10,000. And again, it's based on poverty and school performance measures. So we get the minimum that you're going to get as a district in this particular area. This is a new one in terms of the state allowing for enrichment activities that complement school programs. You can look at literacy intervention. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can allocate these funds. Last year, we bought technology devices for the new K-6 global language program that we would not have been able to afford without these funds. This year, we have a lot of new teachers at the high school level that are teaching AP courses for the first time. To send a teacher to a summer institute can cost a couple $1,000s in some cases, depending on where the institute's located. So, we only can afford maybe 1 or 2 of those trainings a year. We really need to do 3 or 4 this year at a minimum. And so we're going to use some of these funds for increased summer institute training for a couple of high school teachers. And we're also going to allocate some of this money to support fine and performing arts at all grade levels. So that's the fine arts program, but also the music and performing arts programs as well. And that's all of my title funds. I'm going to turn over to Gwen now, and she's going to talk about Title III funds.
Okay, so Title III funds are funds that we get from the federal government that are based on our counts of students that we've identified as LEP or limited English proficiency by the state. So this past year we had, this current year, I'm sorry, we had about 2,200 hours that we received, serving about 17 students. We are actually in a consortium with the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio because you have to have a minimum of $10,000 to be able to access your funds. So we don't have that, so we have to go into a consortium, and the ESCCO is our fiscal agent for that, and so all of our funds funnel through the ESCCO. We have access to professional development. We have control over what we spend our local funds on, but some of the money is directed towards the ESCCO to support professional development, supplies, things along that lines that we can send staff to. And that money fluctuates every year. The amount's based on the number of LEP students that we have each year. And so we've been in the consortium probably, over 8 years now, 9 years?
No, we went into it right after, maybe a year after I got here, so
Okay.
probably about 6.
6 years? Okay.
Yeah.
And we will continue to do that. I don't foresee our numbers getting to the point where we would hit a $10,000 threshold, so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't continue with the SCCO for that. The final part of our federal funds come through for special education funding. Back in, when they passed the Public Law 94-142 back in the 70s, the federal government guaranteed 100% of the funding for special education services. I'll let that sink in for a second. 100% guaranteed funding for special education services. Our allocation last year was just over $500,000. Mike can share with you the fact that that does not cover 100% of our special education funding, but it's what we get as the allocation for Part B. So like Ryan said earlier, there are parts of the federal budget that we have to share with Rainbow Christian Academy. And so they elect to take their funds. They are electing for the first time this year to take the federal funds. They have typically turned those funds down in the past. This year, it's a per child amount based on how many students they have with disabilities, and the state determines that per share amount. It's not a funding amount that we determine. So based on the per share per amount, they have up to $28,000 to spend this year on providing services for students who have recognized IEP needs in their building. We're still working through how we're going to spend those dollars. And so this number comes from the number of special education students we had in fiscal year 2017. It's usually a 2-year delay. On an October count, these only can be used for students with identified needs. So in our district, we have put everything in this dollar amount into staffing. So this covers about 6.5 intervention specialists for us for the district. So then the other part is the early childhood funds that come through the federal government. And this is based on just the number of children that we have ages 3 to 5 who have been identified as having IEP needs. Because we have all of our preschool services, as you already know, go through Licking County Educational Service Center, the dollars kind of flow right through us into them to help decrease and offset the cost for our preschool services. And so we don't have any other decisions to make about those dollars at this point. We just flow those right through the Licking County SC based on the numbers. So, any questions about the federal funds, either for what I oversee or for what Ryan oversees?
I'd make one observation just from the standpoint of early intervention. We take an approach in a variety of different ways of trying to spend these dollars at the lowest level possible to get the greatest return long-term. Because if you address intervention needs early, you don't have to spend more money later down the road addressing additional deficits. So we are very intentional in taking that approach to early intervention.
I would like, the one thing, especially with the IDEA funds, as opposed to the others where we have, supplement, not supplant, we actually have through IDEA something called maintenance of effort, which means that we as a district cannot spend less on special needs students this year than we spent last year, or we risk losing federal funds unless we can demonstrably show we have fewer students meeting those needs. So as long as we are staying the same or growing, so even if, if we're doing budget reductions and we have intervention specialists leaving, this year we replaced it with 2 of them who left, and that's because we do not have a decrease in our population, and by not maintaining that effort, we actually can lose federal funds doing that. It's a little bit different threshold than the supplement not supplant.
The only other final thing I'd add is that, as Gwen mentioned, the level of federal funding is a sliver of the money that we spend on these programs. So it by no means covers the entire cost.
Can you estimate on a percentage basis what that $500,000+ federal funds covers?
I'm trying to remember, the last time I was doing some of this work, which was about 6 months ago, I believe that the total amount that we spend on services that IDEA money could be used for, not including the IDEA money, was either just under or just over $3 million. And that's not including the IDEA money because we're not allowed to supplant. And so in reality, we probably are spending about $3.5 million, of which the federal government is covering 1/7, which is just short of 100% if you do the math.
Even I can figure that out. Thank you.
Honestly, I just haven't paid much attention to the federal funding. Not that it's not supporting important things, but it's just a small sliver of our budget. So, Mike, based on your kind of experience with other school districts and things like that, is this really driven by primarily poverty needs? Is that
No.
right? Or and free and reduced lunch, or
Yeah.
as well as this student?
It depends on which federal program. The IDEA money is strictly on the number of students with disabilities.
Okay.
If we have 1,000 students, or not 1,000 a lot, if we have 300 students with disabilities, and another similar sized district that's a lot, let's say Whitehall, which is similar, has 300 students with disabilities, we're gonna get similar levels of funding. But the difference is, but when you get to IDEA, and I'm sorry, not Title I is really driven by poverty.
Okay.
And so with us having essentially a poverty rate of 5 or 6%, we're gonna get a lot less money than a district like Whitehall that may have a 60 or 65% poverty rate. And they're going to get probably at least 6 times the amount of money per kid that we get.
Right. But in the services that are provided to the students are also controlled mainly through other legislation. So the cost side is something that would be similar with other districts?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The requirements are federal. There are also state requirements as well, they're on top of that, but we'll just leave it at the federal requirements.
Questions? Okay, thank you very
Thank you
much.
both very much. Okay, next we have our 5-year forecast from Mr. Mike Sobel.
Okay. All right, 5-year forecast. We'll start with, in the same spot that we start normally, taking a look at the current forecast compared to the forecast in May. The one big difference you will see is because we are now in a new fiscal year, everything is rolled forward a year. And so in the top forecast, the October forecast, 2023 is now showing up, which it was not in the May forecast. The two circled areas, fiscal year 20 next year, and then fiscal year 22. And what you can see from those numbers is the forecast really has not changed all that much from the one that I did in May. If you look at the cash balances at the end of next year, which are the black circled lines, they're within $6,000 of each other from where they were in May. The red colored circles and line, that is the operating deficit. We're still we're still in an operating deficit across the whole year, all 5 years. But the amount hasn't changed that much. It's come down a little bit from about $2.5 to $2.3 million in 2022. That's primarily because our enrollment has picked up a little bit beyond what we were expecting back in May. And so it's been generating a little bit more state dollars through the formula, because the one thing that it has done with the additional enrollment is we've been forecasting to be on the guarantee starting in 2020, and we've actually gained enough enrollment that we should not be guarantee funded. Assuming the current formula is in place, we should be formula funded going forward, which means we will get some additional revenue. Like you'll see when we get to that part, it's not a ton of additional revenue that we'll be getting. Really, the main thing that looking at it is looking at the cash starting in 2022. We have been projecting to have a $900,000 cash deficit, meaning we have negative cash in the bank, and at the end of 2022, that's come down by about $300,000 because, again, primarily the cumulative effects of the state aid and also some calibrating of the money that we're getting from the pay to participate, which is a little bit stronger than we had originally expected. What you can really see in the top graph when you get to the end of 2023, that $600,000 that is close to $4 million. That, again, and this has no levy in it. We are not allowed to include the levy by law. So this is without the aid of any levy. Is by the end of 2023, if we did nothing, which obviously we can't do nothing because we can't run out of cash like that, but we would be $4 million in a negative cash situation at the end of 2023 if everything just continued on as we're projecting right now with no additional revenues from a new levy.
Mike, can you talk about the fact that we have cash on hand for the next 2 years and how that fits into the levy structure that was decided on and why that's important?
Yeah, that's important, and actually we're going to see this really well in a couple slides. Where that's important is that because we've chosen the income tax route, that comes in much slower than the revenue from a property tax would come in. And so those cash balances are allowing us to have the income tax because we can wait for that slower phase-in to get there because we do have enough cash to continue operating. What you can see is when we get at, if we don't do this year, you see by the end of 2021 we're down to $1.7 million of cash. And the money comes in too slowly from the income tax to cover that shortfall that we're seeing with that. Or the less, not really the shortfall, but the lower amount of cash.
So that's why the timing is important in terms of
Yeah.
income tax levy as opposed to a property.
Yeah, that's why, and that's actually really clear in what happens in two slides down the way. Okay, next thing we're gonna take a look at is, this is actually a 10-year forecast. And again, this is with no new revenue, and what the district would look like on 10 years from now. Obviously, you know, it's a lot of trending stuff because, you know, we have no idea in 2027 what the situation, a lot of things are gonna be. But if the current trends continue, what you see is, out in 2028, we would have a cash deficit of over $30 million, which actually is the entire size of our budget right now. You know, our whole budget last year was $29 million. And so, yeah, what we saw in the previous slide, where we're at $4 million in the hole in 2023, that would continue to grow to over $30 million by 2028 if we don't do anything, which again, obviously, you know, we can't do that.
Is there a point at which the state comes in and manages?
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a three-step process called fiscal watch, or fiscal caution, fiscal watch, fiscal emergency. We are not at risk of any of those right now. If we do not get new revenue and don't take action to really, you know, what we need to deal with is, if you look in 2020 or 21, we had that $1.4 million operating deficit. If we're not dealing with that number and 2 years out we're showing a negative cash balance, that would probably trigger a fiscal caution. If we get to 2021 and we're still projecting a negative cash balance at 22, that would trigger a fiscal watch. And if we get into 2022 and we're still projecting a negative cash balance that year, that would get us into fiscal emergency, at which point the state appoints an oversight board, and they become essentially the legislative body, and you as a board pretty much have to do what they tell you that you have to do, and they will take whatever actions they deem necessary to erase the negative cash balance. So that's kind of the progression.
Which is why we make the cuts we make, so that we avoid.
Correct, we pushed that back 1 year with the cuts we made, and if we don't get money by the end of this year, you know, we're gonna have to do another series to address not only the $425,000 deficit we're expecting next year, but, you know, we have to start addressing the $1.4 million deficit that we would be expecting the year after that. Because you don't want to wait until that year to deal with, because then the actions that would be taken are going to be much more severe than if you're dealing with it a year ahead of time. Okay, what this is the 10-year forecast again, but this is with assuming the passage of the income tax. And to get to Russ's point, if you look at kind of the middle row there where it says proposed new levies, and you can see if this passes in November in fiscal year 19, so the year we're in right now, we're only going to get $290,000 of income tax revenue, and we will still spend more than we're taking in this year, because part of the program is to move some inside millage to deal with our capital, and a part of the inside millage will get moved this year. And so we would still actually be operating at a small deficit this year, even with the income tax passing. What you can see is we would start operating at a surplus in 2020, bringing in more revenue than we would be spending. And that would continue through the end of this forecast period, 2023. And again, what we anticipate with the current assumptions about spending and revenue. So, yeah, we haven't done anything to replace the positions that we lost, we haven't done anything with pay to participate. Basically, nothing horribly goes wrong with our infrastructure that is causing us to do something that we don't want to have to do in the next 5 years, that we're not planning to do in the next 5 years. We would have about $9.5 million of cash on hand. But then you can see, starting in 2024, granted, this is a long way into the future, a lot can change. But with the current trending, we would start drawing that back down again. Where, even with the income tax, our revenues would not be keeping up with inflation and our costs. But if you look all the way out to 2027, 9 years from now, we would still have $2 million of cash in the bank. And again, this is what we've been talking about, a much longer term sustainability. The history in the district has been about every 5 years we have to come back for new money because of property tax inability to grow. And so this does provide a more sustainable, longer term opportunity. And the district can manage towards that as we get towards the latter parts of that, hopefully to extend it beyond the period that we have here. But on the other hand, there are other risks that can happen that we can't predict right now that could make us go the other direction. But this is what we look like in the longer run with the new income tax. Any questions about that before I go ahead and move on?
So when would a future potential levy be in addition to the income tax? I mean, it is renewed.
Presumably sometime out in that 2026 to 28 period, depending on, obviously, a lot of factors between now and 2026 that I think I wouldn't begin to try and forecast what those might be. And I would guess that somewhere in that range.
But this model still aligns with the natural flow for levies in Ohio, where you build up a cash balance and then you spend down over
Right.
time. It's just a longer period of time. It's a very similar model for the typical levy.
But the real difference with the property tax and this is because of the potential growth in the income tax. And you can see I do have a couple % growth built in each year to the revenue going forward. Because of that natural growth, we have the potential at any given year to maybe even get enough growth out of the income tax, if certain things go right with spending, that we may go a longer period of time without deficit spending, because at least we now have some potential to get growth. But again, to put that in perspective, the amount of money that we're talking about here, again, if you look out at 2023, 2024, you're talking about $5.5 million out of what would then be a $35 million budget. So again, it's only 1/7. So essentially, it will give us the ability to grow, but it's only giving us the ability to grow on 1/7 of the revenue that we get. Our primary source of revenue is still going to be property tax. And that still has all the issues with not being able to grow, which is why even with the extension and the ability for this to grow, the expenses are catching up to the revenue growth again, because it's only 1/7 of our revenues that are growing with inflation. I mean, that's way better than what we have now, but it's still only 1/7. Okay, taking a look at where we are cash-wise, we do have a cash balance guidelines that the board approved a few years ago, 10% of the current year's operating revenue, which right now is about a little under $2.9 million. And that's the green line. The green line is going across is the balance. The goal is to remain above the line. What you can see is over the next 2 years, with the exception of the next 2 Januaries, we are at or above that line. But what you also see is if you look at June, where the green bar is 3.7 in 2019, and then you look at June at the end of 2020, we are getting awfully close to that cash balance line. You also see in January of 2020, that $800,000 at the end of January maybe could cover a payroll. Maybe. Is about one payroll's worth of money. So we are, we're getting back to a situation like we were in 5 years ago, when we were getting to the end of January, hoping we did not have to go to the bank to borrow money to make payroll until property taxes started coming in. And so that's part of the problem. You can see from June of this year to January, there's about a $2.9 billion swing in our cash in that period. And that's really where we need to keep the eye on, is the bottom part of the cycle, not where we happen to be on June 30th. Taking a look at our enrollment, you can see with the graph that we peaked in enrollment in 2010, all the growth that happened through the 2000s, through the developments in Park Trails and other places. And then coming out of the housing market crash, we actually lost about 140 students over about a 5-year period. We bottomed in the 2014-15 school year and have now begun climbing back up again. If you look at the projections based on what we've been seeing, in the school year that starts next, it's hard to believe it, the school year that starts next July, we are expecting to have our enrollment back to where it was in 2010. So we will have recovered those 140 students by next school year, and you can see that beyond that, we're projecting another 30 or so students on top of that by the time we get out to 2023. So, yeah, we're essentially at that point, we'll have grown every year above 1. We are expecting a small drop in 2021 because the birth data is indicating that we have a smaller kindergarten class, and that senior class from 2020 is the largest class that we have in the district right now. So we'll have the largest class going out, followed by a smaller kindergarten, or what we expect to be a smaller kindergarten class coming in, and that's accounting for the one drop that we're expecting to see over the next 5 years. But generally an upward trend.
But that could change if we see a lot of movement.
It's assuming a pattern of movement like we,
okay.
I mean, that's built into this. I mean, that's what's driving this is, we usually get a net from mobility, we call mobility, which is people coming in relative to those moving out. We usually get anywhere from 70 to 90 new students that way. What keeps our overall enrollment from growing 70 to 90 students is that typically our kindergarten classes are roughly 50 to 70 kids smaller than the outgoing senior class. And so, we're jumping 70 to 90, but we're losing 50 to 70 from that, which is why we're getting that slow, steady growth instead of, a much more rapid upward trajectory. Taking a look at our revenues, looking back 3 years, looking forward 3 years. Right now, about 62% of the total operating revenues of the district is coming from real property taxes. When you add in property tax allocation, the orange slice towards the bottom, which is tied to the property tax, it's just the state reimbursements. We're really getting 70% of our revenue driven by our property tax right now. We're getting about 23% of our revenue from state aid. That has, even though we've been getting more state aid, that has been dropping as a percentage of our revenue, and we expect it to drop another percentage point going forward. Again, even though we're going to be getting a little bit more, it's still a smaller part of what we've been getting. You see the jump in our other revenue, from 3 years ago from 2% to now 4%. I that is the impact of pay to participate, and the impact of us, where we've, over the last couple of years, we've added additional all-day kindergarten classes with tuition. Both of those revenue sources go into other revenue, and that's why that is growing. You see it actually flattens out going forward because we're not anticipating adding any more all-day kindergarten classes, although that's probably something we're gonna have to keep an eye on. The pay to participate will get the bump, but then it stays fairly flat. Okay, you've seen this slide before. Last year, 2017, was a reappraisal year in Licking County. You can see in the highlighted area, just below the middle, our residential properties after reappraisal went up by 14% across the district. Our agricultural properties went down a little more than 1%. But because of how the tax system works and the tax reduction factors, that 14% increase in values yielded about 1.5% growth in revenues, and that was actually 3 years worth of growth. So in reality, that generated 0.5% a year in growth in revenues for 3 years because of the way the system works. 2020 will be a triennial update here in Licking County. At this point, we don't have a whole lot of data that's moving into that yet. And at this point, we're looking at a 6% increase in home values in 2020. Even if it's a little more, it really is not going to generate much additional revenue because it just means the tax rates will get rolled back further, and we'll just get growth on our inside millage. So again, we're probably on a 6% growth. We're probably going to get maybe 0.75% growth in revenue on a 6% growth in valuations in 2020.
Mike, I think that might be the single most misunderstood concept in this community and maybe statewide, is that, people assume that when their property taxes go up, they assume that the schools get more revenue. And until you go through the conversation about House Bill 920 and the reduction factors, people don't really understand that we do not get that same commensurate level of growth in revenue. As a matter of fact, it's 0.5% per year. And
it took a 14% increase to get us
right.
that 0.5% growth a year.
Exactly, and I think that is a point that we want to make sure people understand through this process.
And that's also, when I talked a little bit ago about, only 1/7 of our revenue growing with inflation, this is still going to be the major source of revenue, and it maybe, if we're lucky, will grow 1/4 to 0.5% a year going forward from growth in values. And so that's a pretty anemic growth rate for your largest source of revenue that's funding.
So there's a lot of people, again, that like to bring up, oh, my house value went up so much, right? And they talk about how their taxes went up so much with the reappraisal. If their taxes went up, there's probably somebody else whose taxes went down.
Correct.
Because on average, right, the amount of taxes paid through property taxes at the school only went up 1.5% a year.
Right.
For 3 years. It's
Right.
average
And so-
0.5% a year.
So
So you
for
hear
gift-
from a lot of people that say my taxes went up, but you don't hear a whole lot from the people that say my taxes went down a lot.
That's correct.
But they're out there.
They tend not to complain because they assume it was a mistake. They don't want someone to find the mistake. And so, you don't hear from them very often. Taking a look at our state funding, when we looked at this back in May, almost every year was in the orangish, tannish, whatever, salmon, whatever that color is at the top, because we're on the guarantee. We are now projected to be on the formula each year. I mean, that's good and that's bad. Well, it's good. I mean, ideally, every school district should be on a formula, not on a guarantee or on a cap. The challenge with being on the formula is that everything matters. So you add a kid, you get more money. You lose a kid, get less money. Value moving makes you wealthier, you get less money. So everything matters in the forecast now. But again, I think that's a good thing, that we are formula funded, and I would love to see more districts formula funded. hoping if we get a new funding system, almost all districts will be formula funded, would be the hope.
One of the, one other issue with this state funding formula is if you look back in the last 2 years, we have gone from a guaranteed district to a capped district to a formula district. So that variability, sometimes that happens within a year. So I think it is really important to understand that the volatility of the state funding formula is real.
Yeah, last year, we started the year as a formula district and finished it as cap district because we added 25 kids as the year went on, and the first portion of those were enough to get us up to the cap. Once we hit the cap, the additional kids we got no additional money for it, because we got the cap and the most we were allowed to grow under the funding rules. Putting some of this in perspective, if you take a look at our state aid between 2010 and 2017, on a per pupil basis, we got a 3.2% increase over 7 years, which is less than 0.5% a year. And so again, this is our second largest source of revenue, and it's growing at about the same 0.5% a year on a per pupil basis as our largest source of revenue is growing, which explains why our expenditures are growing faster than our revenues, because the two largest sources are not growing. Looking forward at the projected aid, you see those graphs are getting bigger each year. It's a little hard to see that because they're not getting a lot bigger, other than in the last year. I mean, we're looking at a little bit of a jump last year. And so we're looking at a 3.2% increase in dollars over a 5-year period. But we're also expecting 3.4% enrollment increase, which actually means over the next 5 years, even though we're getting more money, on a per pupil basis, we're about staying flat. We're actually very, very modestly declining on a per pupil basis over the next 5 years. And that is getting growth in revenue. That is actually getting more revenue from the state every year, but we are not getting enough growth to keep up with even the modest enrollment growth that we're seeing. Last piece, I did want to talk a little bit, we've talked about the need for capital and what this looks like. What this is a look at starting with the 16-17 school year, taking a look at our sources for the capital budget, where that revenue comes from, and then kind of what our future needs are to meet our 20-year plan. And that, in this example, we are assuming that the PI levy would renew. Obviously, the plan is if the income tax passes, we will not renew that. This is what it would look like, if we stayed as everything is right now. And what you can see, the capital maintenance levy, the second column of data, the year we are in right now is the final year of full collection of that. That levy ends at the end of 2019. It cannot be renewed. We will get a half year of revenue in the 1920 school year, and we will get nothing beyond that. The next column, the Park Trails assessment, what you can see there is we peak in the 2019-20 school year at about $165,000. Starting that next year, the 2021 school year, some of the homes are going to start hitting the 20-year mark and not having to pay. And what you see happens is in the first 5 years, we drop from $165,000 of revenue to $70,000 of revenue. Over half the revenue goes away. And honestly, if I carried this through one more year, a big chunk of that 70 would go away the year after that. Because that's the first half of the last big year of construction is what starts going off in 24, 25. And so what you can see, the total revenue, and then starting with next year, the far right column is what our capital budget is if we were able to fund what we need to fund. And you see, even in 1920, when we were about a $600,000 shortfall, and that shortfall getting bigger or at least staying at the 600,000 range and getting bigger every year. And if you think about the cumulative effect of that and what that's doing to our maintenance, is essentially what this is saying is that every essentially 2 years, we're missing a year, every 3 years, we're missing a full year of maintenance, is what this essentially means under this, this forecast of what this looks like without the influx that we would get from what we're planning to do if the impact passes.
And that doesn't include any allowance for unforeseen expenses like we had this year with the fire sprinkler safety
That's
system.
correct.
Which is another $300,000.
Because this year, essentially what we had to do was everything we were planning to do mechanically, because we lost the levy, we had to allocate all of that to the sprinkler system and not do any of the other mechanical stuff that we were hoping to do this year, and that the 20-year plan said we should do this year.
So to put a really fine point on it, that FAR category, future capital plan needs, is really maintenance and replacement of equipment that is expected to exceed its useful life at some point. It doesn't include any capital for building projects, for new
Correct.
construction, for
Correct.
anything other than maintaining what we have.
Correct, including replacing buses and technology. I mean, that's all part of that, as well as the building infrastructure.
Well, and what I'd like to highlight is the fact that, when you see, you've identified the future capital plan needs, but we have been deferring maintenance from, the 16-17 school year, 17-18, 18-19. There's a accumulation of deferred maintenance that is also backlogged, that is trying to be addressed on top of some of that future capital need as well. Because we have been underfunding that capital plan by about $500,000 annually for a while. So you're just addressing the future gap, but there's also deferred maintenance that needs to be recovered.
Yeah. Okay, and that's the essential revenue side of the forecast. The expenditure side, you take a look, and again, not surprisingly, as we've been through, about 80% of what we spend is on salary and benefits. Another 15% is on purchase services. You will see the purchase service share has gone from 14% 3 years ago to 15. Now we're projecting to go to 16 in another 3 years. That is probably the fastest growing area of our budget, and a lot of that is instructional needs and unfunded mandates. Things that, whatever they are, we are required, whether it's state law, federal law, to spend the amount of money it takes to meet those needs. Taking a look at the last 5 years, looking back and looking forward, overall, our spending the last 5 years grew by about 5% a year. The biggest areas being purchase services and benefits. Benefits primarily healthcare, purchase services, what we just talked about. You can see this year the 1/10 of 1% drop. Essentially, we're staying about flat in our personnel spending. That is a result of the reductions in force and the other positions that we left vacant when they opened up. And then the benefits are dropping 6%, which is a combination of both the reductions and the work that we've done working with the association on controlling healthcare. And those are the premium drops for the healthcare change that we're seeing the biggest impact of this year. Going forward, what we're anticipating is a 3% annual increase. Obviously, the changes this year are having a big impact on that. When you put in 1 year of zero on the salaries and a drop in the benefits. You still see purchase services growing faster than salaries through the whole period because of the issues. The capital numbers look kind of out of line. To keep in mind, we only spend about $30,000 a year. And so And last year, I think we only ended up spending about 18, so like $249,000, or 249%, is very little in the way of money. And, yeah, the rest of this stuff is just, mostly smaller items in the budget. Oops. Taking a look at other efficiency actions that we have taken, in addition to the positions that we riffed at the end of the school year, over the past year, we have had 11 staff members leave the district. Again, not including the reductions because of levy failure. The annualized cost of those 11 staff members was almost $600,000. On those 11 positions, we are now spending $318,000, a savings of $277,000. Part of that is because almost half of those positions were not refilled. When they became vacant, we did not refill them. And 2 of the positions that were refilled were special education related, and as I explained earlier with maintenance of effort, we don't have a decrease in our students with needs, so we had to fill those positions when they came over. Taking also just a look at our administrators and our administration. People say, well, why can't you cut administration? If you take a look at this for the 16-17 school year, this is benchmarked against our most similar districts. You can see that we're the kind of grayish color at 177 students per administrator, which is above the average, and that's good to be above the average. Above the average means you have more students per administrator. And keep in mind, this is before the elimination of the assistant principal position through the RIF. And also keep in mind, because of that, in the elementary school right now, we have 1 administrator and 712 students.
Under the age of 10.
Under the age of 10. And in the intermediate school, we have 581 students with 1 administrator working in that building. And so I think it's a little hard to say, well, that's too many administrators. Final thoughts. Basically our fiscal challenges haven't changed. They've just been put off a year through the reduction in force and the implementation of pay to participate. Obviously, from the one slide, the capital needs cannot be funded in the longer run without additional revenue. I mean, we see the shortfalls. And when you look at it, if we don't pass this levy or a levy in May, if it comes to that, if we don't get additional revenue, really by the end of this year, we have to deal with not only the $400,000 deficit we're facing next year, but we're going to have to deal with the $1.4 million deficit for the year after that, because I think at that point, the community will have told us, no, we want you to operate with the revenue that you have available, and that means addressing the $1.4 million shortfall, and not just the $400,000 shortfall. Any final questions?
Thank you, Mike. So we're now at the point in our agenda where we welcome public comments. If anyone has a comment or opinion they'd like to share with us, I'd like to just step forward to the podium. Please tell us your name and address, and you're free to make comments.
I'm Dallas Wildman at 40 Hampton Drive in Granville, and I'm here on behalf of the Granville Arts Boosters. The Arts Boosters are aware of the Granville Exempt Village School District's upcoming ballot issue, As an organization that supports Granville students' arts experiences by purchasing equipment, uniforms, auxiliary instruction, and scholarships, we recognize the district's efforts to obtain additionally needed resources to not only support fine arts, but also other essential pillars to a quality education. To that end, our organization voted unanimously at our September 19th meeting to support this ballot issue. Please include the Granville Arts Boosters name moving forward as is appropriate with other supporters.
We thank you and the Arts Boosters for that public support. That is very gratifying and we appreciate it.
Brian Costa, 2324 Business Court. I'm here on behalf of Granville Recreation District, to which I'm a trustee, actually a school board trustee. So, same thing with the Granville Recreation District. We passed a resolution to unanimously support the school district in their levy efforts as well. We realize you guys as a strategic partner. We collaborate a lot with you guys. The board does a great job at overseeing the tax dollars, and we find that we were in full support of all levy efforts.
We appreciate that as well. Thank you. And thanks to the GRD.
Hello, my name is Guy Manis, 159 House Lane, Granville. I had two separate questions. One is, I was at a village council meeting. Obviously, you can tell I have nothing to do with my life. I go to meetings. And at the meeting, there was a proposal by an architect for development on Newer Granville Road of 30-plus homes just across from the Colony. There. My concern was he made a specific point of stating that Mr. Sobel in the Granville schools was in support of that development. That he'd come here, talked with the Mr. Sobel about the development, and he's classifying the home as the development as empty nester homes. But there's no deed restrictions. There's no. These are 2,200 square foot homes, easily built into 3-bedroom homes or more. And I just don't. My concern is that I think we get into a bad area if we start having the schools supporting or not supporting developments in the area, especially residential. When our major concern is commercial development. And I was concerned that, so I want to make sure first off in this world of fake news and everything else that goes along with that, if that was in fact the case that the Granville Schools is supporting developments now or officially going behind and supporting developments.
We can address that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
just-
So, okay, it was Jerry Bird, if that helps you out.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, that has to do with the levy. I was up here after the last levy, and I had mentioned I've worked on several levies, and one thing I've always said is you're going to have the yeses, you're going to have the nos. You got to give away the independence, reason to say no. And I think one of the things that hasn't come through in all the literature, both positive and negative, is what you've done to improve the financial budgeting in the schools. For example, until tonight, I had not heard that there was a reduction in overall personnel in the schools from net exchange, I guess, a loss of 4. The only news I've read is we had the reduction in force after the last levy, and then we had in the newspaper was a hiring of the 3 personnel, which includes a football coach. So to me, that's not necessarily much of a net exchange, but I think you have to get more of the, not necessarily levy material out there, but you have to get about the positives you're doing as far as expense control. And that's it for me, and just want to make sure I share that.
Appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Anyone else? With that, we will close the public comment section of our agenda. Thank you for your comments. And then move into board discussion, which we had indicated tonight would be around the levy. I think it's also appropriate and useful to respond to both of the areas that Guy suggested the questions on. So if you want to-
Can I,
Yeah,
can I
sure.
start with
That's
the last question first?
Sure.
So what Mike presented on as far as the loss of FTE, I think what you missed is that was beyond the reduction in force. So if you look at what our payroll was, how many people we paid in April of 2018, and then in August, it's about 11 less in aggregate.
No, that's what I'm saying, I hadn't
Yeah.
heard that, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, that's the kind
Right.
of news I think would be helpful.
Yes, and
That's
so,
okay.
so in aggregate, it's 11, that's with replacements, and what we try and do is anytime we have someone leaving the organization, we try and hire at a lower level so that we realize some cost savings through that process. And that is true, that we've been following that practice ever since I've been here. But yeah, the net FTE decline is 11.
And that's a combination of the 6 positions we eliminated, which were not refilled, and other positions where there were voluntary retirements, resignations, and what have you. And as Mr. Brown indicated, some of them we filled at a lower level and some of them we did not fill.
So that's the clarification of that.
To be absolutely clear, we have not refilled any of the positions that were eliminated following the May election. On the commercial development piece, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Sobel, I will tell you that the board has taken a position for the last number of years of advocating locally for commercial development, which will help with economic sustainability in the community and help to build up some of the commercial revenues that come in, can offset or ease the burdens on residents in this community, because it's out of balance. In most communities statewide, it's about 75% residential and 25% commercial. In Granville, it's 90-10. And it's simply because we have a small commercial base here. So we've advocated openly, actively, and consistently for some commercial development. We're almost always consulted when a new proposal comes in for residential development, whether it's been the case of apartments, whether it's in the case of single-family homes or condominiums or the like. We're almost always consulted on that and asked to give our views on that with respect to how it would impact our student population, our expenses, our capacity to absorb. And so, and again, I don't want to speak for Mr. Sobel, but what I would tell you generally on a 30-unit housing proposal, and I fully agree with you, as far as I understand, there's no deed restriction there that says it's limited to seniors or retirees. But we would not expect to generate significant students out of that development. And so it would not impact us negatively in terms of population, in terms of ability to absorb those students within our existing facilities, and it would, in all likelihood, be a net positive in terms of revenues that come to the school district that are generated by students who attend the schools. Is that fair?
Yeah, Mr. Bird did come in to talk to me, and I took a look at it, and really what they were talking about is something that is very much like the Colony across the street. Right now in the Colony, there are 43 units, and we have 2 kids of those 43 units. They are a similar structure of what they're building, 2 bedrooms with a loft and the same type of structure. And based on the design, based on similar to the Colony, I did not feel that we were at great risk for a lot of students because of the history we have with the Colony.
So, conversely, there was a proposal that was batted around earlier this year to build 200 apartment units within the community. And we expressed concern over that because we, in our forecast, we thought that would put significant pressures on our capacity.
In aggregate, we watch that the number of new home starts or potential developments with a fine-tooth comb, because right now there is the potential for close to 100 new home starts in some of the existing developments, and so we are always looking at that and at least giving our opinion to the Planning Commission both the township and the village. And so we try and opine and look at the data that from a similar type development and give that information to the planning commission for their ultimate decision.
Anybody else comment on that? Well, then, there's this thing that we have coming up in November. As everyone knows, I hope, we placed a 0.75 all-income tax levy on the ballot in November. We did so after, obviously, having our 1.25 earned income tax levy proposal not pass in the May election, and after which we undertook a number of steps, first of which was to reduce headcount, eliminate significant positions, positions that we consider to be important and meaningful in the lives of our students, and not something that we took lightly, but we did so in order to make sure that our budget was balanced going forward. We've also looked for other opportunities, as we've discussed, to reduce expenses and reduce headcount where possible, and we will continue to do so as we have done for the last number of years. We then invited the community in to conducted 4 different public sessions, public comment sessions. We invited folks in to give us their perspective on what they liked about the schools, what they liked about the community, what their thoughts were with respect to school funding, because it's important to note here that as Mr. Sobel indicated in his 5-year forecast, this is not a question of levy or no levy. It's a question of what kind of levy. And if it becomes a question of no levy, then the issue is significant material cuts to schools as we know them. And so we solicited input. We received a tremendous amount of interest from folks in the community, lots of suggestions, lots of input, lots of comments about various options available to us: earned income, all income, property tax. And ultimately, the board made a determination after receiving all of that input from the community, and we put that 0.75 all income tax levy on the ballot. The information campaign with respect to that levy is being conducted by a dedicated group of volunteers from the community. The board is not allowed to run a campaign, and we don't. We all, I think, obviously believe in that levy because we voted to put it on the ballot for the community, but we can't run a campaign. So that work is being done by just a number of volunteers who are giving up so much of their time and their talent and treasure to support that effort and inform the community. And it's, nights like this one when it becomes apparent to us that that's a never-ending job in putting information out to the community so that folks know that we've been responsive, we've been prudent, we've made cuts where necessary, we will continue to be accountable stewards of the community's resources while at the same time doing everything we can to place the best interests of the kids in this community, the students, at the highest level of priority. And so that's the job between now and first Tuesday in November. And I know many of you, all of you have perspectives and views on that, so I don't want to keep talking here. I want somebody else to.
I'd like to highlight something that we intentionally included into the 5-year forecast, which was going back to that administrative, number of administrators per pupil. And we put the information up there related to the fact that we had an assistant principal that split between the elementary and the intermediate. That position was eliminated. And I think it is important for the community to understand that we have one administrator with 710 kids under the age of 10. And yes, we have a lot of teachers to support the educational needs, but that is not an easy task. As a former elementary principal of a large elementary, and I have an assistant, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have that. But the The other thing that we didn't do is, we eliminated the communications position. What I think is important to recognize is we are kind of a bigger communicator for the broader community. People would send us information and we would distribute that out. And we've had many people say, well, why aren't you sending out any information now? Well, because we're sending out our information only. And that's what we have the capacity to do right now, because that requirement now was placed back on the administration, the building administration, or administrators like Mr. Bernath and myself. So there is a tangible loss of resource and a tangible loss of service that is associated with those administrative cuts. And I hear, I live in this community, and I hear, oh, there's too many administrators. And I don't think people are informed about how many administrators actually are in this district. And I can tell them from my experiences in many other school districts that that is absolutely a false statement. So that's why that slide was in the presentation.
I think the levy committee is doing a fantastic job. There's just a lot more energy around this levy. There's a lot of people that really got motivated and got shocked into action based on the failure of the last levy. So I'm really encouraged by the positive work they're doing. But really, it comes down to like personal conversations, right? It comes down to like being willing to talk to your neighbor and ask them whether they have any questions and encourage them to get the answers, right? Because anybody that asks the questions and is willing to listen to the answers, like almost unanimously becomes a supporter, right? People that haven't thought enough to ask those questions, right, or haven't taken the time, right, might be confused about how many administrators we have, or how much we're spending on things, or what the impact of state funding is, and so forth. Right, I think we've done an enormous amount of work and homework to kind of come up with this structure, and I firmly believe it's the right thing moving forward. It's really, really the right thing that our district needs to do. But it's a lot of individual conversations that need to happen between all of us in the community to kind of make sure that this is supported going forward. But kudos to the levy team for all that they're doing, because it's really moving forward nicely.
No, I agree that if anybody has questions, call anybody, because all the information is there, it's all public, it's all out there. We even had people come in and look at our books after the last levy failure, and there were no suggestions on, to do anything differently than what we have done before. So, books are wide open, books are online, the checkbook, you can see everything that we're spending, so there's no secrets. And so I encourage people to, if you don't know what an administrator does, give us a call, ask us what they do, because some of our administration we have because the state mandates that we report out information, and therefore we have to dedicate an administrator just to reporting information to the state. So I think, I've learned a lot just being on board. So if you're at all interested or, or not interested but want to know, we're all here, that's why we're here. So please call us, email us. Happy to provide any information that we can. So it's all public, it's all available.
Well, I was just going to say that I really appreciate that our partners like the Granville Rec District, of which I served as a trustee. I mean, not speaking for them, but as a former trustee, the Rec District truly appreciates the partnership that they have with the school districts. There would be, I'd be hard pressed to say we'd be allowed to offer as many programs as Granville Rec does if it wasn't for the partnership, which I don't think a lot of people know. We have free access to the buildings. There's not a charge, there's not a rental fee, and we have a great working relationship. And as with the Art Boosters, it's good to see that our partners out there appreciate what the district does. And I do appreciate Mr. Mando's comments about what needs to be promoted. I appreciate that. I think it's important that folks in the community let us know maybe what we're not promoting enough of, or what we need to let people know what we have done. And I think, to echo what Mr. Miller and Mr. Janisse said, the levy committee is doing an outstanding job. Those volunteers are committed, there's a passion there, and it can be, it's a lot of time that they're volunteering on behalf of all our kids. To say thank you is not near enough because of the commitment they're making to our school district. So I really appreciate it. I'm sure, I know the whole board and the administration and staff do as well.
I am disheartened that anyone could consider that we have not been good stewards. I am unbelievably unhappy that there are critical resources, the two school buildings, that are minimally accessible to our kids. Because it's not possible for Mrs. Clausen to be in the intermediate school and run a library, and a library does not run itself, and kids need access to those books. And Mrs. Montgomery cannot run two libraries simultaneously. It just offends me that anyone is not aware or doesn't take the time to become adequately educated to understand how this is affecting our kids, how it has already affected our kids, and this levy is not going to reverse those things. But the failure of this levy is going to exacerbate drastically how much diminished what we are doing would become, and that cannot happen.
Else?
Couple of final thoughts, if I may.
Certainly.
Okay. I think it's important to realize, because the Arts Boosters work here and they do provide a level of support for the arts, and we've always talked about the balance of academics, athletics, and the arts. And we spend about $1 million annually to offer the level of arts instruction that we have, because we believe that it actually benefits them academically. And so some of the other things that they provide help offset some revenue that we would spend, but $1 million annually to support the arts is an intentional decision by this board that says that's what a well-rounded education is. And I think that point should be made. The other point, and Fred touched on it, the GRD and the Granville schools are strategic partners. What that means is we intentionally look at our budgets and say, how can we maximize taxpayer dollars and resources to not have them spend more? So where a lot of government entities compete with one another, we work together to benefit all the taxpayers in Granville and provide a level of service that our taxpayers enjoy because of that partnership. And we don't look at turf, meaning whose pot of money is this and whose pot of money is that. It's about how do we share resources to provide the max benefit to students and this community. And it's beyond just the students. They provide a lot of other services that are hosted in Granville schools that provide opportunities for growth for all ages of community or Granville residents. And I want to highlight the intentional side of that strategic partnership, because I think that's what good government does.
So for example, we don't charge, as Fred pointed out, the rec district to use our athletic facilities, because frankly, they'd be paying for it with tax dollars that they collect from local residents. I don't think that's appropriate. They repay us another way, so they'll take responsibility for cutting the grass, maintaining the fields, maintaining facilities, and doing things like that saves us money as well. So I think you're spot on, Mr. Brown. This is a partnership that really shows a united effort to maximize the community's resources in order to provide the best opportunities available in the community. Look, as I said, it's not an option, it's not a question of levy or no levy, it's a question of which levy or massive cuts. Right? And as Mr. Sobel's presentation indicated, 80% of our expenses are on human capital. Right? We don't buy a lot of raw materials. We spend money on people that teach kids, that protect kids, that work with kids, that coach kids. And so, to the extent that more cuts are required, it'll be cuts to people, which changes class size, it changes program offerings, it changes experience levels, it changes the academic experience for our kids. And I know, Jeff, you've been fond of saying, you repeated the story that when you went to the reception earlier this year for new parents in the district, you asked for a show of hands how many people moved here because of the schools, and everybody raised their hands. We do for less and achieve superior results, and those results are available, as Dr. Corman said, for everybody to see. Our average expenditure per pupil is below districts that we outperform by a mile. We do for less. If there's no big savings to be had here, cuts will be significant if they're made. In any event, I will, unless anyone else has any questions, I will again, on behalf of the board, thank the folks who are spending all of their time and effort away from their families, their jobs, and other things, and devoting their time, talent, and treasure to promoting the levy campaign, to informing the community. I know that my colleagues and I cannot thank you enough for that. So we'll close the board discussion and move into board reports.
Great. I'll start with a quick update on some news from the Granville Education Foundation. This year is GEF's 25th anniversary. So there will be just some celebrations around that and some campaigning to hopefully raise some additional funds and draw attention to all the great things that GEF does. And so expect more from that over the coming year. The board is energized and it's a great group of folks that's leading that. And it's not officially on the agenda, but I'm going to give you a quick update on the Granville Township Pathways Committee, which I've served. They have completed a survey that is now live, and so I wanted to ask Jeff and the district to go ahead and start publishing that through our channels. The goal is to get feedback from parents at all the different buildings, as well as others in the community, about what they value about walkability and bikeability and sidewalks and access to schools. And so there's been a great survey that's been designed to help gather that information that will steer the township in terms of decisions on which pathways to pursue and ensuring we get funding from state sources and other places to support that. So that's out there, and I will make sure you email if you don't have it already from that committee, so we can publicize that through our various channels, newsletters, and ways news and so forth.
Yeah, what we can do is post a link on our website. We can also promote it through the Blue Ace News. Do you know when that survey is coming down?
I think we chose to leave it up for 4 weeks.
Okay.
So
our next Blue Ace News goes out I believe the 17th. Would that be adequate?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but make sure it gets in the school ones as well.
Yes.
Those ones.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, we'll get those out to the leaders.
great. Okay.
That's true. And it's fantastic, the Ed Foundation, 25 years.
Yeah.
Of folks who go out and fill the gaps and contribute money to programs that make a difference and allow teachers to do some extra special things in the classroom. Really amazing. Thank you. I'll speak on economic sustainability. There are really two things I want to mention. First, and it was timely that Mr. Manos mentioned the board and the district's involvement in some community development activities. There's a proposal that many of you may have seen for development of a medical office building on Newark Granville Road, just off of Newark Granville Road down by Thornwood Crossing. We have looked at that. We would certainly encourage that project to move forward. We think it will, obviously it's not going to put any strain on our ability to absorb new students, and it will add to the commercial tax base, add a service that we think would be useful in the community and appropriate for the community, and we think The other thing I will mention, and Mr. Brown has really taken the laboring war on this, there is a joint effort between the Granville Village Council, the Township Trustees, Board of Education, with participation from Dennison and others, to work on furthering the economic development plan on Columbus Road, which would include potentially executing a joint economic development agreement to devote some resources to extending sewer and water and internet capacity to encourage business development in that area. And that area is already populated by businesses and some buildings that should be populated by businesses. So I know, Jeff, you've spent a lot of time on that. I know that group has met several times and has now formulated thoughts on what's important to each one of those constituencies.
The last meeting, if you remember, we had a discussion in our last board meeting. We kind of identified a couple of our needs and wants, and we communicated those to Brimberg at the township. And in their last meeting, I think they discussed all the different entities' needs and wants, and those are going to go into the process of drafting the MOU that would then kind of solidify everybody's intent and desire to move forward with the CDA.
So the MOU is a memorandum of understanding that basically encapsulates the agreement of all those groups to work together collaboratively to support appropriate commercial economic development.
Correct.
In that corridor, which again is meaningful to us. And it's one of the reasons we heard consistently from folks after the last levy campaign who questioned what could be done to encourage economic development. We've certainly been active, as have others in the community. One of the reasons that even though Mr. Sobel's forecast indicated that we think the levy, if passed in November, will last 8 to 9 years, perhaps longer, we put a 5-year limitation on it to come back to the ballot for the voters to consider in 5 years, to offer views on whether it's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, whether it's collecting too much or too little, and also to take into consideration what we hope would be some economic development which would occur in the interim, which would lessen the need for that amount of levy. So we certainly hope that within that 5-year period of time, if voters support the levy, that we'll see some economic development that broadens our tax base.
Yeah, I actually have something.
All right. Action agenda.
Okay, the action agenda, 11.01 is the resolution authorizing the purchase of natural gas service.
So moved.
Second. So what we have done in the past and are recommending that we do in the future is get involved in a consortium with Meta on our natural gas purchasing process. It's a consortium buy, so we realize the benefit of scale and volume through that bidding process. And this would give you, or give us the authority to enter into that competitive retail bidding process.
And actually give them the authority, yes, to undertake the bidding process. They're getting this approval from all of the cooperative members. And there are a lot of cooperative members as part of the gas purchasing cooperative.
Overall, it gives us more buying power. We can outkick our coverage on this one.
Yes.
Combining with other folks.
Is it mostly school? Or
It's, yeah,
all schools? Is it
yeah,
school?
that works on campus schools. Yeah, a significant portion of the schools in Central Ohio are part of the consortium.
Some questions? Comments?
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Janine?
Aye.
Thank you. 11.02, there is a laundry list of board policy updates.
So moved.
Second.
I would just remind you from our previous board meeting where we did our first reading, almost all of these are related to legislation passed this summer, Senate Bill 216 and House Bill 318. Those two, one was a deregulation law, the other was a school safety and security piece of legislation that had a lot of other tangents to it from a board policy standpoint. And so you have the long list of policies, and I'll entertain any questions if you have any.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question about the online fundraising campaigns and crowdfunding. So read where some other districts have been running into issues with that.
So what we discussed in last month's meeting was to include that crowdsourcing or funding process into our current student fundraising activity process. So what that looks like is an advisor or a teacher wants to do a fundraising activity, they must submit an application to the administrator. That administrator has to sign off, then it goes to me. Once I sign off and I look at the criteria according to board policy, and I sign off, then it goes to Mr. Sobel for final approval. And that's how our process works. We would include any crowdfunding in the same manner from an operating procedure standpoint, to try and mitigate and minimize any potential risk.
No ad hoc fundraising.
Yes.
Other questions?
And Mrs. Foucher, my office does a very good job of staying on the advisors to make sure they're following the process and filing their final reports at the end of the fundraiser to make sure, and we do evaluate whether they are actually raising money or what the result is.
Take a roll, please.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Cornman,
Aye.
Ms. Dees,
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Aye.
The consent agenda 12.01A through C5.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so what you can see in the donations area, a couple of different things I'd like to point out. Donation from the Wetlands Foundation of $1,000 and $2,000 to the Land Lab. So we have several things going on in the Land Lab right now, but one of them is the design and build of a platform that will go out the north side of the building, and it will be a place where somebody who maybe can't physically go into the Land Lab can observe that area. That was, again, a partnership with Terra Nova and several other entities, and a student-led project. So you see some of those.
Is that Northern Service? Who is Northern Service?
Yeah.
Do they construct your building?
No, I don't think that they're associated with the actual construction.
No, because Terra Nova is.
Yeah, Terra Nova is doing the construction, but there's several other entities that are funding.
Like the street in Wetlands House?
Yes, exactly. The other donations, the Safe Classroom kits, if you walk around the buildings, you'll see these bright yellow and green boxes that are PTK kits, or treatment kits. They're part of our safety and security plan. And we did a classroom campaign process for people to purchase classroom kits. So we want to thank all those individuals. We have heard some conversation that a large business in the area is planning on partnering with a couple other entities to potentially purchase PTK kits for all of Licking County classrooms. I don't know if that's come to fruition yet, but I believe that might take place here in the near future. The other thing I call your attention to is the resignation of Mrs. Keller, our vocal music teacher at the middle school. She is going to be resigning and retiring, effective immediately. So we want to thank her for her service to the community. It was really nice in the band concert. They sang the Granville School's alma mater because Mrs. Keller was the one who rearranged that piece several years ago and into its current form. And so it was kind of a nice send-off for her. But we want to recognize her service.
Questions or comments? Take the roll.
Ms. Dees,
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Jennings?
Aye.
Brings us to our financial.
First is the monthly financial statement for September.
So moved.
Second.
You guys have probably heard enough from me tonight. I will just highlight two things that, just so you're aware, is if you look at the revenues, it looks like we're way ahead of last year, and we are. That's because we got our property tax rollbacks a month earlier this year than we did last year. So that will flatten out when we get to the end of this month, because we will not get it again. The other thing, just a point of concern, the area purchase services, again, are running a little faster than I would like them to be running at the end of 3 months. I've gone and looked at what is driving that. There are primarily three things. The biggest driver has been in the maintenance and area, and that's okay, because that's just timing. That just means that we're spending the money a little bit faster than we did last year, and we're anticipating that'll level out.
Because there is a budget associated.
There is a there is a finite budget associated with it, so they can't spend more than the finite budget, so that will level out. The second area, when I said things were running hot, it's actually in this area being literal. With the weather being what it is, our electricity costs are running much higher than we anticipated. I'm sure it is because of the constant running of air conditioning, because as you noticed outside today, we have still yet to get to fall. And so I think that's driving the electric. Unfortunately, that probably will stay with us because there's nothing to make up. And of course, the third area is in our instructional services, are running a little faster than we had forecasted. They're running up about 10%, which we had hoped would not be the case this year.
So because demand is higher than it was?
It's probably a whole slew of things, yes. So that's where the three areas are. We'll keep an eye on the instructional services going forward. But hopefully, maybe there's a little bit of timing in there that will balance out. I said the maintenance will certainly do that. The electricity, we're probably just going to be out that money because not much we can do about the comp. All we do is hope that it finally cools off, so we don't have to run the air conditioning constantly.
And instructional services is specifically paid to and for what?
Basically, it's most of it is for services for students who are leaving the district to be educated. It is the unfunded mandate area that we talked about that has been the fastest growing line item in the budget and is continuing to be the fastest growing line item in the budget.
And one we have no discretion.
Correct. That is correct. We have no discretion over it.
Questions? Comments?
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Mr. Jennings?
Aye.
Thank you. Second item, which I'm happy to report, I actually remembered to place on the agenda, as opposed to the one time a couple years ago, is for you to actually approve the 5-year forecast so you can file with the state.
Second.
I will presume you do not want to hear the presentation again?
Thought it was an outstanding presentation.
I assume you will not want to hear it again?
Yeah.
Are there any last questions about it? I don't think it needs to talk about
I
it.
had one question that occurred to me afterwards. We've been in a historically low inflationary period in the past, right? And I'm not sure if that's going to continue or not. What risk does general inflation have to the 5-year forecast, or a forecast in general?
Probably the main areas where we have risk in the economy is in fuel. If fuel prices start taking off again, we're at the mercy of fuel prices. We can't really control what's going on there. And the rest of it is general supplies. If there's inflation, that will affect us. It affects us a little bit in the food service, although that's outside the general fund. And we've not been running a deficit, so that shouldn't be an issue. But the supplies, are such a small portion of our budget that, even a little more inflation is not going to put terrible strain on those purchases. Now, if a extended period of higher inflation, then as we talk about base and inflationary wage increases, we'll need to talk about that if you have an extended period where inflation is running at 3 or 4% rather than the 1 or 2% that it's been running at since, really since the recession. And so I think that's, since that's our largest area of spending, that's probably also potentially our largest risk, but it's also, we do have some control over that as well, though.
And to some extent, but essentially salaries and benefits are going to have to track this up with inflation, which could effectively bring in the timing of future potential levies.
It could,
Right.
certainly.
With extended inflationary pressures like we're seeing now. Okay, thank you.
Good question. And Mike, with respect to fuel, some years ago, I know we looked at potentially hedging some of our fuel costs, locking in some longer-term contracts. And of course, the lock dropped out of the fuel market, so it became unnecessary. We would actually lost money at the time. But it might be worth looking at and seeing whether there are folks out there doing that. Oil production is increasing, obviously, but I think inflationary pressures are something to impact. But I'd be interested in at least maybe having your thoughts about that.
Yeah, we can look at that. Well, and, one of the other things that we've also talked about, but is really contingent on the levy passing, is, we have a very small fuel tank right now. We can only store so much money, and there's some potential environmental.
Store so much fuel.
We're not storing money. Thanks for
Just wanted to clarify for the record.
It's getting late, I'm sure. Store so much fuel. And we've looked at the possibility of getting a larger tank, which would allow us, at times when prices are low, to accumulate more. But there are capital issues with that would have to be addressed that are outside of our ability to do anything. That is another thing that, I've talked with Mrs. Sherburne and Mrs. Clary about at least investigating, potential of what would be involved in doing something like that if the resources to give us, again, it's a hedge against future inflation by being able to buy a higher volume of fuel if prices are lower.
Thank you. I think for that, something we definitely look at. Any questions? Take the roll, please.
Ms. Dees? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
1303, their annual resolution declaring transportation impractical.
Second.
We are required by state law to transport students to any non-public school that is within a 30-minute drive of our district. Some we do anyway, like Granville Christian or some of those. But Grace Christian School, which we have one family going to, and Marbury Academy, which we have a handful, the cost of doing that is what we deem impractical for the number of students we are doing. So what this allows is for us to pay those families payments in lieu of transportation, which you will get in probably another month to approve the payments for those. To declare those two transportation routes impractical for us to fulfill.
And it's impractical because we'd be required under state law to use a bus.
We would essentially be I think between the two, there are probably 11 students right now, between Marburn and Grace. And like I say, at Grace, it's all one family. So we would need to have a bus and a driver to transport 11 kids to school in New Albany and Grace Christian's in Blackwood, but it is within 30 minutes.
Questions?
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Dees. Mr. Wolf.
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Aye.
Okay, final resolution, 1304 is a resolution to do a fund transfer.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. What we're doing here, this is similar, if you remember a couple of years ago, we took one of the funds that was in our system, in our accounting system, and moved it to then the music boosters, because the nature of the fund, a lot of what they did was external. It was easier for the music boosters to raise the money and to administer that fund. What this is doing is a similar thing with what's our fund, 300-901B, which covers marching band, jazz band, and blue steel. At the recommendation of Mr. Smith, we had discussions over the summer that it makes sense to keep marching band within the district, but the other two functions, a lot of what they are doing are fundraising things, paying for trips, going places. They do gigs out in places and get donations for them. And the feeling is that it would make more sense for that money to also flow through the arts boosters. And so what this would do is take an amount, we're still working on the exact amount of no more than 1/3 for each of the cash balances for each of the programs, and move them to the boosters, and they would be have separate accounts within the boosters. The accounts have actually already been set up. They are doing stuff outside of this already. This would just move that cash to the purposes that the boosters would fulfill. That will ease, I think it will ease our accounting burden, and it'll ease some of Mr. Smith's accounting issues that he has to deal with.
Is this be like an annual thing, or is this part of the
So one-
operating fund?
this is
It's
a
one-time,
one-time
in the history of these funds, is just, they were put there from the previous budget.
And basically it's a one-time transfer of the cash, that, portion of the cash that's in the fund to maintain doing the same services, but going, in the future, the money being raised is going to go to the boosters and funnel through the boosters rather than the district.
Remember, this isn't taxpayer dollars, this is revenue generated by.
Yeah.
This is, that
None
was
of
my
this-
question.
yeah.
This is money they've raised.
Yes.
Okay.
There is no tax, in Fund 300, there are no taxpayer dollars anywhere in Fund 300. That is all raised by the activity, doing whatever the activity is.
Questions?
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Dees. Mr. Wolf.
Aye.
Dr. Corman. Mr. Dees.
Aye.
Second.
Ms. Dees.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Wolf.
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Aye. Thank you all very much.